Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joe Klein from Time Magazine, and I realize that the usual conceit for someone like me in a situation like this is to say that, well, David and I are old friends, which we are, and that what we're going to do is give you a peek at the kind of conversations that we have privately when I come to visit him in Chicago or at the White House. You know, just the same old conversation. That, of course, is utter nonsense. Because in part, if we were going to do that, we'd wind up spending half the next hour talking about my suspicion that he's moving from his allegiance to the Chicago Cubs to the Chicago White Sox, whom he's going to see tomorrow.
It's not true.
But the other important thing to know,
I love the White Sox too,
but the other important thing is that David's main function here is not to make news. To enlighten without making news, and my main function here is to kind of push against that a little bit. But I'm going to let you push as well. I know that all of you, in wandering around this place the last couple of days, I know that you have a lot of questions about President Obama. And so I'm going to try and divide this 50-50. I'll ask a few questions, and then you can ask a few questions. The other conceit is that I know that you know, you want to tell us about the state of the campaign, the state of the presidency. So I'll open with, you know, a fairly broad and not very barbed
You're working up to the barbed questions?
Which is, so David, how's that hopey-changey stuff working out for you?
Let me at least write your own stuff.
The art of journalism is the art of creative theft, right?
First of all, let me say, the two of us are very flattered that you guys turned out on a day like this. I would not be here if I were you. Secondly, on this White Sox thing, I want to tell you a story. When we were during the campaign, and Linda Douglas is sitting over here. She may have been there, but we were in Massachusetts for an event. And the president, then Senator Obama, came in, and the Yankees were playing the Red Sox that weekend. And the guy who was running the fundraiser handed Obama a Red Sox cap. There were 5,000 people waiting there. He said, "Well, we want you to wear this cap." And he said, "You're insane. I'm not wearing this cap." So he went out and he said, "They want me to wear a Red Sox cap." And I had to tell him they had the wrong colored socks. And everybody booed. And he said, "But when you're playing the Yankees, I'm a Red Sox fan." And at that moment, I thought, this guy could be president.
So how is that hopey-changey stuff working out for you?
Well, let me say, I did travel the country with him in 2007 and 2008. And part of what he said at that time was that change was not going to be easy. That change was going to be hard. And it was going to take time, and that the problems that had developed over a long period of time were going to take some more time than we'd like to solve, but that we had to be resolved to hang in there and work on them over time, which has not been the strength of Washington to take the long view, to do the hard things, to work on the difficult problems. What we didn't anticipate was just how difficult the situation would be when we arrived. I guarantee you that at no time during the campaign did we have a meeting to say, the first three things we want to do when we get there is a $787 billion Recovery Act, shoring up the financial industry, saving the auto industry. These were not in our plan, and it wasn't what we anticipated, but it was what we were called on to do. So the circumstances were different, and the implacability of the opposition was disappointing on some of those things that went right to the heart of trying to deal with the financial crisis. But having said that, this is no. I'm not coming here under false colors. I'm an admirer of the president. It's not just that I work for him. We've known each other for a long time. I have a deep respect for him, and it's deeper now, having sat down the hall from him for 2 years. than ever.
This is also true off the record, by the way.
No, I mean, I get accused of being, you know, a Mooney and all that. That's not it at all. I mean, I think I'm very hard-eyed about this, but I think he's dealt with these things with tremendous grace and thoughtfulness, and I've seen him deal with so many difficult things so well. And a lot of them have to do with, are we going to solve this short-term crisis, but are we also going to deal with some of those long-term issues? Because we face two challenges. One is to deal with the crisis at hand that came through the deepest recession since the Great Depression. But the other is this long-standing problem of changes in our economy that have made it more difficult for the middle class. You've seen over a long period of time wages stagnant. You've seen as prices rise, and it's put an enormous amount of pressure on the middle class in this country. And that was part of what animated our campaign, a good part of what animated our campaign in 2008. And so there are structural things that we have to deal with and that he's worked on, and that where the payoff isn't immediate, but the need is absolute, whether it's education reform or health reform, whether it's an emphasis on research and development and alternative energy and so on. So, you know, this is a long answer to your question, but with change is still what we have to fight for, and it's a long-term project. But I'm hopeful because of some of the decisions that he's made, and because I know he'll make the right decisions in the future.
Well, over the last couple of days here, I've been kind of testing the mood of this crowd. And as you can see, you're not looking at Tea Party Nation. This is, you know,
Pomegranate juice.
Pomegranate juice nation. You know, I've had long conversations about the need for cold storage in Afghanistan so that the pomegranate crop could be preserved. But then again, if we do that, we're not helping stuff here.
Maybe we're taking this thing in the wrong direction.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, the sense I get, this is essentially a moderate crowd, both Dems and Republicans. There's a sense, and you feel this out in the country as well, a sense of disappointment in the president. They know that he's smart, they know that he's trying hard. They wonder why he hasn't been more forceful, why he hasn't cut through. I'm sure you hear this all the time, and I'm sure you guys have meetings about it all the time. What do you think, why do you think that this impression's out there, and what can you do about it?
Well, first of all, I don't think anybody's ever come to office, at least in, well, I think in my memory, anybody's come to office with greater set of expectations. He inspired this country during that campaign in 2007 and 2008, and people were eager for things to happen perhaps more quickly than they have happened. You know, one of the things that I think people wanted was, you know, there was a lot of what he spoke about when he ran was to try and get us past this very polarized politics and
sure did
deal
that.
with it, do that. Well, but you know, I think that we underestimated, as I said, some of the I spoke at a thing earlier, and I noted the fact that, you know, there was a strategy on the other side that was pronounced and.
Were you actually surprised by that? I mean, for those of us, you were around during the Clinton years, that was the exact same strategy that Republicans used against Clinton. That was, number one, to try and destroy his credibility as, you know, as a human being, and number two, to stand foursquare against any kind of tax increases.
Yeah, I understand that part, Joe. The fact is, when we came to office, the country was, we were facing a national emergency, really. I mean, we were in meetings every single day from December before he took office and many months into the year to try to stave off what the economists said was a 1 in 3 chance of a second Great Depression. And so I don't think it was, and look, I think there are people of goodwill on both sides of the aisle. I think there was a strategic decision made, and I noted earlier it was discussed publicly, bragged about that, not to give the president bipartisan support on any of these major initiatives because that would confer something they didn't want to confer. So people who did want to work with us were discouraged from it, and that was unfortunate. I also, I think generally, and I don't want to rehearse what was talked about earlier in that other panel, but it is, and this was true in the Clinton years as well. But we have to get away. We have to get away from this notion that somehow, if we disagree on policy, that I am going to discredit you as an American. That somehow, if your point of view is different than my point of view, then you're fundamentally, not patriotic and so on. And I don't think the majority of Americans. I think that they share my view on this, but that's the nature of our politics. So I was even in the Clinton years, there were Republicans who were willing to work with Clinton, not on the tax cut in '93, but on many other things. And so that was. Are you asking me was I disappointed about that? Yeah, I was disappointed.
What I was asking was why the impression exists out there in this audience that the president hasn't been forceful enough, hasn't stood up for his principles enough, hasn't really led the process in some issues, mostly on domestic rather than foreign. But that impression's out there, and why is it?
Well, because I think that, and I'm not suggesting I'm not impugning any reasoning to anyone in the room particularly here, but I do think that there is oftentimes a mistake made between effectiveness and loudness, and that there is a the president, in my experience with him, has been very focused on getting things done. We had to get a Recovery Act done. He was very focused on getting health care done. He's focused on pushing education reform. There are things that he wanted to, he wanted to get Don't Ask, Don't Tell repealed. He had goals, and the way he approaches these things is, how do I get to the final goal? How do I achieve these goals? And he has achieved the goals I mentioned and others by approaching it in that way. Now, in Washington, every single day is election day. We've got, frenetic cable news, and it used to be when you and I when you and I started in the business, there were 24-hour news cycles. Now it's a 10-minute news cycle, and every day, the question is the president up, is the president down? Everything is covered as if it was a campaign. So it is not satisfying sometimes to those who want the fight. His orientation has been, the goal is the goal, and do what you have to do to get the goal done. Leadership ultimately is measured by where you end up and what you achieve. And when people look back in history at this administration, the question is going to be, what did he get done? We're not going to get marked up for style points each day, or whether our barbs are sufficiently sharp on a day-to-day basis. We're going to get measured on the things that he has accomplished.
But there's a fundamental job of the presidency, which is to sell what you've done, especially when you're trying to do such complicated things as financial regulation reform, the health care bill, which, to my knowledge, in my experience, most Americans have no idea what's in it except for the things that actually aren't in it.
Yeah.
And I've told you this story before, but I'll tell them. I was at a town meeting in Yuba City, California, last September. Guy gets up and he says, my mom just got $250 in her bank account, and she didn't know where it came from. And she asked me to look it up, and I did. And it was the $250 that the government had sent to fill the donut hole. She was, for prescription drugs and Medicare.
So you think we've been insufficiently exploitative of the things that we've done?
Not exploitative, but you've set new standards. This is the first president I have ever encountered who has given the American people 3 tax cuts and never told them about it. What's up with that?
Well, one of the issues is one of the questions that came up, because Bush had a tax cut and they sent checks that he
Signed.
Yes. And one of the things that we faced when we passed the major middle class tax cut that we passed at the beginning of the administration as part of the Recovery Act is if you did it that way, would it as quickly be ingested into the system at a time when we needed the stimulus? And the answer was it'd be much more effective just to do it, you know, through the payroll, and that's what happened.
And they also told him you can't tell anybody you've done this.
No, Joe, the fact is we can sit down and I can go through innumerable speeches he's given on this, innumerable radio addresses. Here's the reality of life in America in 2011. Federal taxes have gone down. They're at the lowest level in decades relative to the GDP. State and local taxes have gone up. People are feeling more burdened. And therefore, there's not like, they don't say, well, you know, I'm paying more and I feel burdened, but thank God for that tax. That's not the way they think. So we have made the presentation, you know, we have talked about it, but you're right, we haven't, I mean, yours is essentially a political critique. It is a political critique. We're trying to get the economy, you know, to accelerate the recovery, and we're trying to get money in people's pockets and so on. And we're not viewing it as we didn't view it primarily as a marketing exercise. On healthcare.
But everything is a marketing exercise. But let's move on.
But no, let's talk about healthcare. Because you raised healthcare. He knew when he started, and there were long discussions. Healthcare was not a winning issue, and that's the reason why no one since the Clintons in the early 90s even dared approach it. We were facing a situation where, you know, the healthcare system is imploding because of costs. Peter Orszag, our budget director, said you can't solve any federal budget problems unless you do this. Businesses and families are going to face the same issue. And so he took on what was fundamentally a very difficult issue that will pay off over a long period of time. The seniors got their checks. There are young people who are getting coverage now who are up to age of 26. There are a series of insurance protections that are in place now. But it's going to be over time that the realization, that people will feel that realization in their lives. If we were looking for immediate gratification, it was not the issue we should have done. What the President of the United States decided to do was take on a very, very difficult issue that hung like a dark cloud over our future, and he took it on and against all odds, because for the better part of a year, scribes, I haven't looked back at your stuff, were flaying him for not getting it done. He got it done, and I think, as I said, I think history will look back at that as a very, very positive thing.
Well, I want to make a substantive critique at this point. At the 115 session that you were involved in, I was off moderating in an alternative universe, so I didn't get to see it. But I hear that someone asked you why the president was so tough on business. And
anti-business. Yeah.
So anti-business. And my question to you would be, why, after a 30-year record of chicanery and financial manipulation that culminated in one of, you know, the great financial crashes of all time, when some of our smartest young bankers were playing casino games with the prime assets of most Americans, why the hell isn't he tougher on them? Why didn't he break up the big banks?
Well, the question is, what were we trying to solve? What were we trying to solve? The fundamental mission to start with was, how do you prevent what happened from happening again? Because that's his responsibility. You know, there's no doubt that going in and nationalizing the banks would have been a symbolic number. Yeah, well, but the problem, Joe, was less size than the interconnectedness of these banks and financial institutions. And what was fashioned was a financial reform that does a series of things that deals with that, you know, that makes derivatives transparent on a marketplace, which was one of the major problems there, that gives the government resolution authority, so they can go in and shut down one institution in a way that cordons it off, that requires much higher capital standards for these. And let me tell you something. If you think that we're being too soft on them, then sit over in our place and watch the furious lobbying campaign that's going on to try and unravel the financial reforms. By the way, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which we fought for and we won, and we're now trying to
well, you and I have a disagreement about that too. I think you should appoint Elizabeth Warren, fight the good fight, even though you know she's going to lose, to make it clear who is in favor of protecting average Americans from payday lenders and who isn't.
Well, you know, we appointed Elizabeth Warren to set up the agency instead of nominating her and sidelining her because we thought she was the best person to set up this agency, to choose its leadership, to set its direction. You keep saying that you want to raise substantive questions, but you default to political analysis.
In this case?
You know, to us, the substantive challenge was how do you create a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that does the mission that it was assigned to do? And if we had the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that we've set up now 5 years ago, we could have avoided some of the best.
You just raised the red flag because what you did was to establish a law that every last bit of it is probably reversible because you put all of the major judgments in the hands of regulators. What you didn't do is what the IMF, which has been directed by Americans for the last, since its founding, did in society after society in the 1990s, throughout Asia, throughout Latin America. When you had a case of crony capitalism, which is what we have here, the IMF forced the countries to restructure their banking systems. You walked away from that.
That's not true, Joe. The fact is that this financial reform that we passed, that the financial industry is trying to unravel and that Republicans in Congress are trying to defund, has a series of things that puts much greater burden on these financial institutions to behave responsibly and gives the government authority to step in and essentially dismantle them when they run aground, much as the FDIC does with smaller institutions. So I get your rhetorical flourish. I understand you want blood. I
don't want blood. I just don't want this to happen again.
Well, then the question...
And it is going to happen again, as long as it's structured the way it is. Let me ask you another question. We'll go to another substantive area.
Okay, let me just say, I don't stipulate what you just said. Now we can move on.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more substantive, tough question, and then I'm going to ask you a softball, and then I'll turn it over to you. But, the substantive question is this. 10 days before the election, you guys very kindly made the president accessible to me, and we had a really good, long conversation. And one thing I got to say about this president is that when you ask him a question, he answers it. And he is one of the few American politicians who has respected my intelligence and not treated me like an idiot, assuming that, he's just going to give his pre-taped response to everything. And when we talked 10 days before the election...
Where's the gratitude?
Where's the gratitude? Have you been reading me the last 2 years?
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Do you see all the things that people write about me as an Obama patsy? God.
Let's see.
Anyway.
We'll see if we can dispel that in this hour.
But anyway, during that interview, what he didn't mention healthcare once. He was completely focused on the economy and on the notion that the easy credit economy that we've been living through for the last 20 years had vanished, and that we had to move toward a green economy. Now, you said before that he chose to go the healthcare route because it had long-term impacts across the entire society. And I give him great credit for that.
And implications for our finances.
But the American people were focused on the economy, and the energy issue is a matter of real substance and importance to the economy. Why didn't he focus on that? Why didn't he do something like, tax carbon?
Like pass a well,
tax carbon and pass that money back in lower payroll taxes.
yeah. As you know, we passed a cap and trade bill through the House. It stalled in the Senate, as lots of things have stalled in the Senate. He also he made the single biggest investment in alternative energy and in energy research through the Recovery Act ever. He raised fuel efficiency standards for the first time in 30 years, and we're continuing down that road. He's done a series of things, and we're going to continue to work at it. The notion that in a sense, we're the victim of our own success because he passed health care, so everyone who has an interest in a particular issue says, well, if you did this, then you could have done that, and if you did that, you could have done something else. The reality is that we've pushed a lot of policy to try and modernize our energy sector and to create sort of energy. I'll give you an example. Through the Recovery Act, we invested in spurring the development of batteries for cars. America had 5% of that manufacturing when we started. I think it's up to about 20 now. I expect it to be about 40% of the global market by 2015. These are things that were directly as a result of the initiatives that he took. So, if your point is that, I shouldn't say insinuation, you're making a point.
Yes.
It just sounded like an insinuation. If your point is that somehow if he hadn't done health care, that we would be in a different place on energy policy, you're wrong. And one of the things that is absolutely mandatory for a president in these times, given the challenges we face, is the ability to do many things at once, not just one. And he moved on many fronts. He moved on education reform, and he did some very important things on education reform. He moved on financial reform. He moved on healthcare reform, and he moved on energy. Now, he may not have moved as far as we would like and as you would like, but we're a long way from where we were, and we're going to continue to work at it. And this goes to my point before. Change takes time. There are imposing barriers in the way. You have to keep chipping away. And I'm proud to work for a guy who has the long view and continues and doesn't get knocked off stride and continues to push for the kinds of things he believes we need to build an economy in the 21st century that offers great opportunity.
Let me, before I turn it over to you guys, let me point out something that I've noticed over the last couple of months that not many people, I think, in my profession have noticed or appreciated enough. And that is, the president had to make two very important national security decisions in the last 2 months. And both times he went against the advice of the military. When it came to the Osama bin Laden case, Secretary Gates has said that he wanted to just bomb the place. The president chose the more risky route. When it came to Afghanistan, very clearly the president has turned away from David Petraeus' preferred strategy of counterinsurgency and moved more toward counterterrorism and building the Afghan National Army. This speaks to me of some real growth on his part as a commander-in-chief. And, you got to see this firsthand. You were right down the hall. And so I'm going to ask you to strip mine your memoirs a little bit and just tell us about the change in the guy. I mean, he is, for most of us, he seems opaque. He seems incredibly cool, incredibly smart. We don't know what makes him angry. We know he can have a wicked sense of humor. And I at least believe that he has really grown in office. Prove it.
Well,
with an anecdote.
Yeah.
That's what that's
well,
a courtesy
I will
of
tell you the
journalism.
day, I happened to be at the White House on April 30th, which was the day before the bin Laden mission. And I went to visit the president because that evening was the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and I usually help out on the joke writing. So But we had lunch. And
You had a field day with Donald
He
Trump.
had been to
Drove him from the race.
Target-rich environment. But he had just come back from Alabama with those terrible storms, tornadoes, and the damage was. Yeah, and we spent a long time talking about that, and he talked about some of the people he had spoken with and how devastating it was and how moving it was. And then he went to Cape Canaveral and he saw Gabby Giffords, and he talked at some length about how well she was doing and how incredible, how miraculous it was, because he had seen her right after she had been shot. And then a briefer from the National Security Council came in, a guy I recognize as a briefer. The president asked me to leave. I didn't think much of it. I came back in, we're doing the jokes, and we came to a joke about Tim Pawlenty, and which, if I were more deft, I could make a joke out of that. But we came to, and
You just did.
Yes, but the conceit of the joke was, poor Tim Pawlenty, he could be a great candidate, but for that unfortunate middle name, Bin Laden. So we get to the joke, and the president just sort of casually says, you know, Bin Laden, that seems so hackneyed. He said, that seems so yesterday. And he said, so we ought to take that out. And we're like, we're bewildered by it. And he said, what else could we put in there? And one of the young speechwriters said, well, we could, I guess, Hosni. All right, Hosni, yeah, we'll put that in there. And I'm thinking, Hosni, that's not very funny. But he got 365 electoral votes. I didn't get any, so it was Hosni.
So you didn't know?
Did not know, and I have to tell you, very few people in the White House did. And the next night, I had done some stuff in the morning, and I was tired. I went to sleep. We were in D.C., my wife and I. She woke me up and said, you better get up. I think they got Bin Laden. And I throw my covers off, look at my BlackBerry. They say, turn on your TV and so on. And so at that moment, I realized why we had to change the joke.
Okay.
But it took a certain, and he knew, I spoke to him afterwards, he knew very well what all the stakes were. And by the way, you say he took the riskier course, but his view was that in terms of, our ability to identify Bin Laden and also the collateral damage in that community, that there was great risk that would have been, to the bombing strategy. But he was very, he was knowing that how much was at risk, including, he could not have not known that there were political aspects to this as well. I mean, we all remember the Carter example and so on. And he was very resolute. He felt he had made the right decision. And one of the great qualities he has, and I've seen it, Joe, not just in the last 2 months or 3 months, but for 2 years, is he makes decisions and he lives with those decisions, and he is comfortable with the decisions that he makes, and he understands that they could go well or they could go badly, but once he makes them, he doesn't look back.
Well, you're in some kind of hallowed place when people like me are criticizing you for not being political enough. With that, I will go to there are 2 microphones out here, and if anybody has a question, only one guy has a question? Come on. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jason Pollock, a huge supporter of the president. I worked my butt off in 2008 to get him elected. I plan to work my butt off again to get him elected.
Thank you. Thank you.
I recently saw a documentary called Inside Job. I don't know if you've seen it. Of all the things that has taken place over the last 3 years, the one thing that truly makes me feel slightly uncomfortable about one of the decisions that the president has made is he rehired all those people that kind of put us in this situation in the first place to kind of fix their own mess.
The movie Inside Job is about the Wall Street collapse.
Right.
And so, just to elaborate on what you're saying, that he put in a bunch of Wall Street guys to run his, economic policy.
Right. And so I guess I'm wondering, in retrospect, do you think that was a good idea to put those people in those positions, or maybe would you have gone a different route?
Well, first of all, let me say, I think that the movie wasn't a very effective movie. It was, executed from a point of view, and there are pushbacks and rebuttals that I think are valid that soften a lot of the edges of that, and I'm not going to get into that here. I believe that the people who the president hired were the right people to deal with what was an enormous crisis at the time. Larry Summers, who obviously didn't fare well in that movie, and relative to decisions that he had made in the past, and I guess but he is an incomparable economist, and his sweep of knowledge on this on economics is vast, and it was valuable to have him. I think Tim Geithner has performed very well and admirably, and was under enormous pressure from the beginning. And you know, nobody would have guessed at the beginning of this that the TARP program, which the Bush administration began with very few requirements, would be wound down in a way that we could actually make some money back on it. And that happened because of the program that Geithner designed. So I'm not going to criticize those people. I believe that they played a positive role over the last 2 years. But that said, and we can agree to disagree, I am so happy and inspired that you're here. One of the great things that I've experienced in my years working with him, and over the last 4 years dating back to Iowa, was the inspiring sight of young people deeply involved in the work of trying to change their country. And I think that's so fundamentally important. So I used to take great strength when all the smart guys in Washington were saying we didn't have a chance. I used to go to Iowa.
Don't to me.
Oh, Joe, I didn't see you there.
I was one of the few who was saying you had a chance.
I used to go to Iowa, and I used to take great solace and great inspiration from the young people there who didn't really care what the pundits had to say and were determined to make a difference. So,
yes.
My name is Chris Gates, and I'm from New York, and I've got a question that's about communications and leadership.
yes.
I'm very clear that when it comes to all of this, I'm sitting in the stands, and you're playing the game on the court. And the game appears and occurs very differently on the court. With the risk of being overly significant, our success in moving forward really hinges on your ability to get people to work with you who are really entrenched and don't want to do that. What have you learned about communicating with people in a way that kind of brings them around and keeps and gets things moving?
Well, it's an interesting question because it does go to sort of style of leadership. And one of the critiques, and you heard it from Joe, is that the president hasn't been edgy enough in his dealings with his opponents, perhaps in his dealings with Congress. And what I said and what I've seen is that he is a guy who's very focused on results, and he'd rather move something forward than score an easy point. And he's as good a listener as I've ever seen. He doesn't, and then he'll make his point. And as a result, we've been able to the Recovery Act, healthcare, and everything else that we've done were not done by anybody. Ultimately, there were changes that were made, but they met his specs. And so, what I've learned is that you need to keep your eye focused on the goal. Now, there are times along the way you need to define what the debate and fight is about, and I think that you'll see that in the next, as we wind down this discussion about how we deal with the deficit and the debt ceiling deadline. But ultimately, if you're results oriented, you want to sit down with people and figure out how to get from point A to point B, and he's very good at that. And I think that is an important but not well appreciated part of leadership in an environment in which you have a very polarized country.
Let's go over here.
I'm also an early enthusiastic supporter of the president, and we'll be working hard for him again this time.
Thank you.
The question I have is about a sense of frustration I felt in his dealing with the opposition to stimulus measures. The economy is still in the worst shape it's been in decades, 9.1% unemployment. The forecasts are that it's going to be bad for a long time. We really should be spending a lot of money on infrastructure renewal. I know he's in favor of that, but the opponents of that policy say the most ridiculous things. They say we can't spend more money now, that will impoverish our grandchildren, and so on. Somebody with his rhetorical skills could could really score big points against those people, it seems like to me. There are examples that are at hand. The one I like best is a 10-mile stretch of Interstate 80 in Nevada that's in tatters. It needs to be fixed. If we fixed it today, according to the Nevada DOT, it would cost $6 million to bring it back up to spec. If we wait 2 years, the trucks and the weather heaving the potholes deeper into the roadbed, $30 million we have to spend. Right now, there are idle people who could do the job.
Yes.
Equipment's idle, materials
Yeah.
cheap, interest rates. Why doesn't he
Let
get...
me just add on to that question a little bit, which is, which is what can you do at this point, given the fact that...
I read your blog posting, so I know where you're going. Today's blog posting.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
I'm way ahead of you, man.
Well, I'm flattered.
I've read tomorrow's blog posting.
You are tomorrow's blog posting. No, but the question is, are you trapped right now? Is the politics of trying to do active, positive things to stimulate the economy, is that in the past?
No.
That,
First of all,
But
let
if
me...
he's saying our grandchildren are going to be impoverished, if that's what the right wing is saying,
Well-
ask them why spending $30 million in 2 years doesn't impoverish them more than spending $6 billion
Well, I
right
think there's a
now.
larger question here on this whole debate. I think we all acknowledge that that the issue of debt is a serious one. It has to be dealt with. And the question is just how you deal with it. It is right to say that if we don't deal with it, you are in some ways mortgaging the future. Absolutely right. But it's also true that if you cut education by 25%, as they suggest, you're mortgaging the future. In the 21st century, if you cut research and development and innovation, basic research, by 75%, you are mortgaging the future. And if you turn your back on infrastructure, I mentioned to a group earlier that one of the most intriguing moments of the Republican debate to me was when Newt Gingrich was in high dudgeon and said, we didn't need a Department of Railroads to build the Intercontinental Railroad. Well, the truth is, what we needed was Abraham Lincoln to pass a massive bond issue in the middle of the Civil War, because he understood that we were going to get through that war, and the economic future of the country depended on building this railroad, and only the federal government had the ability to get that done. He also did land grant colleges and a number of other things in the midst of the Civil War, because you have to have a balanced view of what the future requires. So the president is going to continue to push for an infrastructure bank. We can leverage all kinds of private money as well in terms of infrastructure. And you're absolutely right. The people who have taken the biggest hit in this economy were the mostly middle-aged men who moved from manufacturing to construction, and manufacturing dissipated. It's beginning to come back, and then we've had a decimation in the construction sector because of the housing crisis, and a lot of those guys are idle, and some gals as well. And infrastructure would not only help us shore up the facilities we need for the future, but it would also get people to work right now. So that's something that we will fight for. We're not going to accept the representation that if we do, the other side, their basic theory is that if we cut everything, if we cut government, if we cut regulations, if we cut taxes, if we just cut everything, then the future will be ours. And we know that in the world in which we live, there are things we have to do, other things we have to do to assure a better future, and we're going to fight for those things. I think that's a lot of what this election is going to be about.
You know, to me, the most interesting moment in that debate also was a Newt Gingrich moment when he was speaking about Medicare, and he said, if the public thinks it's a good idea, it might be a good idea. Now, Medicare is the closest thing to socialism we got in public policy. 2 days later, Newt is calling the president a classic European socialistic something or other. He always adds a fourth, modifier in there. It's amazing how the guy can get away with. The day must begin anew for him every day.
Well, I don't know if you've I don't know if you've noticed. I don't think he's getting away with it.
I don't think so. Yes.
I'm Joel Casper. I'm a physician from New York City, and where there are many bankers. And it has been said that the banks that brought us to the brink are too large to fail. One comment, perhaps they're too large to exist, or perhaps Washington has to be vigorous in requiring larger cash reserves that these banks need to have. It may eat into their profits and their bonuses, but I think it's something that needs to be done now rather than later.
And that is, of course, part of the financial reform that we passed. There's no, and we also passed the Volcker rule, which prohibits them from trading for their own personal accounts using FDIC money. Or using money from the Fed, because there shouldn't be federally guaranteed money when they're essentially gambling for their own profits. And that's been hugely, I have to say, hugely controversial. Though Joe is unsatisfied with the fights we've made, I guarantee you the financial industry is fiercely opposed to that reform, but it was done for the reason that you state.
I think it would be really good if the public knew how fiercely opposed to that reform the financial industry actually is. Question.
Maybe we could get a good writer to write about it.
Hi, Esther Lee. Since everyone's professing their undying love for the president, I would say I serve in the administration. Could each of you share your thoughts on the GOP field, current and potential?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that if no one else did.
And David, could you tell us who you would most like to run against, and who you would least like to run against?
He ain't going to tell you that.
No.
Come on, this is all.
But I will. I mean, I'll tell you what I think. I think that there are essentially two primaries going on in the Republican Party. One is the Tea Party primary, and the other is the Martini Party primary. You've got and in the Martini Party primary, you have the regular Republicans, and I don't want to suggest that Mitt Romney has necessarily had a martini. I don't know that, but there's Mitt Romney. Governor Huntsman, perhaps Pawlenty is kind of a hybrid, and then on the other side you have Michelle Bachmann, you have the aforementioned Newt Gingrich, you have Paul and Herman Cain, perhaps Rick Perry of Texas. I think what you're ultimately going to have is a runoff between two of those candidates, and right now, if the worst thing to do would be to prognosticate this far in advance, and I can tell. I think we were 30 points behind at this time in the campaign. But you could see a scenario where Michelle Bachmann wins Iowa, Romney wins New Hampshire, and then they have a protracted battle. And in the past, Joe was mentioning this earlier. In the past, there was a predictability of the Republicans. They had a very kind of disciplined system where it was generally someone who competed before and failed, and they move up in the queue. McCain moved up. But you pretty much always knew who the candidate was going to be. And by that standard, Romney would be the nominee. I still rate him a favorite, but the unpredictable element of this is all the energy in the Republican Party is coming from that Tea Party side. And whether that overwhelms Romney remains to be seen.
Can I follow on to your question? I've been kind of, people were surprised when the Republicans in that debate weren't very hawkish about Afghanistan and, our overseas presence. The thing that surprised me even more has been the fact that Romney in particular has been really aggressive in talking about, the Chinese and willing to put free trade on the table. He did it again yesterday. For me, with the Republican Party, free trade has been part of their birthright for as long as I can remember. That really has been a surprise to me. So I have two questions about that. One is, why do you think he's doing it? And number two, has there been anything about this race that's surprised you so far?
Well, first of all, I think he's doing it because the energy is from that Tea Party side, and the Tea Party Republicans are not free trade Republicans, and they are not. They are, as McCain suggests, they're much more isolationist in their view as well. And I think one of the challenges for Governor Romney is how does he parry these forces? Because one of the things that I think people are going to look for in their president is some consistency. There's no doubt that you have to change and make adjustments along the way, but on the basic things, are you going to be there? And that's a question that's going to be raised. In terms of what surprised me, well, I've said before I was surprised that Governor Huntsman emerged as a candidate, only because I spent time with him in China in 2009, and he was quite effusive in his praise for the president. And so that was a little surprising to me, but politics being what it is, maybe I shouldn't have been.
Okay. It's now 6 o'clock, but we started about 10 minutes late, so we'll take a few more questions.
Thanks. Yeah, Michael Terrell from Chicago. I worked my tail off for the president as well. Changed my life to do it. And I wanted to get you to comment on the deficit, if I could, but what I would refer to as the passion deficit. I know it's early, and the other side's going to have its passion, but you're running an incumbent, and I'm hoping that there's a formula there that isn't like running a policy wonk and the professor-in-chief, because there's a deficit of passion out there. You can feel it.
I think that one thing I'm confident of, I think there's going to be a great national debate next summer and fall about the direction of this country, and it goes to the question this gentleman asked before about what do we need to do to secure not just to address the problems we have today, but to secure the kind of future that's going to reverse these economic trends that are pounding the middle class, that give our kids something better, and that deals with the fundamental problems in front of us. And I think that's going to be a very, very, I think it's going to be a very pronounced debate. I think that I believe, and I'm also sitting in the campaign headquarters where I see an awful lot of energy, and I go out and travel the country, and I actually, lots and lots of people show up, as people have shown up here, to say we're ready to go. I think when that campaign is engaged, it's going to be a very, very energizing campaign, and I have no doubt that the president will be energized because he believes strongly that we're at this pivotal juncture, and these decisions that we make are going to have lasting impact, not just for years, but for decades to come. And so